Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Somebody said my name. Here I am. Hello, how you doing? It's Friday. Specifically the 12th of October. It seems odd to start with obituaries, but I'm going to. It's just because, actually, that's always, these are two obituaries which make me remember that there are strong, wonderful women in this world who have an impact, who stand up and speak out, and both of these obituaries caught my eye today, and I actually want to begin with this because it's an appreciation. These obits are an appreciation of lives well lived, lives to which troubles came, and the sort of indomitability and courage of both these women. One a Pittsburgher and one more of a national figure, albeit by virtue of her husband's status and celebrity. So, believe me, this is more uplifting than talking about living people and what they did to get in the news today. Mary Alice Gorman, I was struck when I saw her name in the obits today. It always is a gut punch when you see the name of somebody you knew, not well, but knew enough to admire, and had no idea that she was ill. I don't know. She was blessed. She died in her sleep. Mary Alice Gorman was one of these women who lived such an extraordinarily full life in so many guises, but mostly she was somebody who just kept moving forward. She was a fighter. She was a teacher, a feminist, an activist, the owner of a loved bookstore, Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Oakmont. And that she did when most people would have said, okay, so now she's going to retire. Oh, no. She opened up a bookshop, independent bookstore, when nobody in their right mind would be doing that. And she and her husband made it extraordinarily successful. Still there. Mary Alice Gorman, I met her because she was the director of the Center for Victims of Violent Crime. And I was asked to be on their board. That was the first time anybody ever asked me to be on a board. I was green, and I don't know that I contributed much at all. As is often the case, every time I've been asked to serve on a board, I learn so much about the organization and the extraordinary work that they do. So she was in the corner always of people who had been victimized in violent crime, especially women, and had an incredible impact. She was a teacher at Peabody High School in the 60s and 70s who got in trouble because she wore a pantsuit, and got in trouble another time because it was deemed that her earrings were too dangly. Welcome to women's world. So I'm so sad to see her go. She also served as the executive director of the Pittsburgh chapter of the ACLU for 3 years. She organized her own consulting company, and it was when she consulted for the Allegheny Center for Victims of Violent Crime and helped them reorganize they were so blown away by how competent she was, they said, "Would you by any chance be our director?" And she took a big cut in pay to do that. So I just want to say this is a life extraordinarily well lived. And she will be missed. The other woman who I never knew, certainly knew of her husband, is named Betty Grissom. There was one line in her obituary which just blew me away. Listen to it. Her son, Mark, confirmed the death. He said neighbors had noticed that Ms. Grissom had picked up her morning newspaper, but not her afternoon newspaper, and went to check on her. She had two newspapers, a morning and a... What the hell? Betty Grissom was the wife of astronaut Virgil Grissom, called Gus. He was one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, the first group. He was the second man that America put into space after Alan Shepard. He didn't do an orbit. Alan Shepard's, if you'll recall it, was just up he went and down he came. So it was like a 15, 20-minute trip. But it was the first time that Americans had gotten there. And then, of course, you had the full orbit flights following. Grissom almost died on that little space trip he took. He successfully completed the 15-minute suborbital flight, the second manned flight of the Mercury program in the beginning stages of the NASA program. And then his capsule, parachuted down into the Atlantic Ocean and almost killed him through drowning. His capsule landed and then sank. And he was able, he was finally able, I think, he fight his way out of he had to be picked up, floundering in the ocean. And Virgil Grissom, I'm going to get to his wife, was also one of the 3 astronauts who died, the first 3 astronauts to die in the program. They weren't even in the air. They were in a test capsule. The year was 1960. I'm going to look for it here because I can't remember. What would it have been? They were just doing a routine kind of a test, and so he was in this capsule with 2 other astronauts, Edward White and Roger Chaffee, and fire broke out, and they were killed. It was the first fatal accident in the history of the U.S. space program. And a lot of investigations obviously followed, and they found so many design flaws. I mean, what were they thinking? They had a pure oxygen atmosphere inside the cabin. The hatch door was almost impossible to open from the inside, preventing them from escaping. Because those 3 men died, NASA undertook major modifications in the design of the space capsules and then required non-flammable space suits. 4 years after the fire, after she lost her husband and was left as a single mother to 2 young boys, Betty Grissom sued NASA. And she was ripped apart for doing this. It was unpatriotic. She sued for millions of dollars, a wrongful death suit. And it was not against NASA particularly, but about the builders, the contractors, which were North American Rockwell, because you can't, I guess, sue the government. Still considered extraordinarily unpatriotic, and she was immediately shunned by the entire and very close-knit space community of which she and her family had been founding members. Her son in the obituary says, "We got the dark side of NASA. People who were my friends all of a sudden were no longer my friends. A lot of people turned their back on us. Mom got a lot of hate mail. How dare you?" Can you imagine if that happened today with social media? At least then somebody'd have to bother to write it down and stick a stamp on it and send it. She was steadfast throughout. And for a woman of that time to go up against the big boys, it took an extraordinary amount of courage. And she never backed down. And you think about it, she said that the day her husband died, she was playing poker somewhere. And when they told her husband was dead, she said, "I'd already died 100,000 deaths being married to Gus." Because the wives of these first astronauts, had to, sort of like the wives of, soldiers, they go through hell, and often with next to no support. Anyway, she did not, she settled the suit eventually for $350,000, which is equivalent to about $2 million today. And that allowed her to, be able to raise her two sons. And also that suit made it easier for the families of the other two astronauts who were killed to receive compensation. Because once she got what she got, it was deemed only proper. So they didn't have to go to court. They didn't have to suffer the ostracism that she suffered. Despite the criticism, she never flinched. This is a man who was her lawyer. She never regretted the lawsuit, never hesitated. So, I'm old enough to have been, those astronauts were so huge in our, as children in America at that time, were so huge in our imaginations and in our, we looked at them with such awe. They were true heroes, courageous heroes. And just as I'm sure all of you remember the horror of the Challenger explosion, this fire in that capsule was so unbearably hard to take in, as I recall. Gus Grissom was to have been the command pilot on Apollo 1, which was going to be testing the capsules for flights to the moon. He, of course, never did that. By the way, this picture that's I guess, is it out in theaters now? Getting rave reviews again. I'm going to say the last one that got rave reviews, I went to and thought was meh. This is about Neil Armstrong's flight to the moon. And there was a rave review in the Wall Street Journal today. Masterpiece. So I'm just saying. And speaking of that flight to the moon, I came upon a funny story about Neil Armstrong in the Washington Post today. It's written by a woman who herself was in Indonesia in the 1990s, and she struck up a conversation with a man from Somalia. And she said, as we chatted one afternoon, the call to prayer pierced the air, the Muslim call to prayer. And she listened, and she turned to Abdullah, which was his name, and she said, I think that is such a beautiful sound. And she said he turned to her with such excitement and enthusiasm and said, is it true? Is it true about Mr. Neil Armstrong? And she said, is what true? And then he said, very matter-of-factly, you don't know? When Armstrong was visiting the Middle East several years after he had walked on the moon, he heard the call to prayer. And he said, what is that? And when he was told, Armstrong said, oh my, that is the sound I heard on the moon. And Abdullah tells the author of this story then, and that is when he converted to Islam on the spot. So it turns out that story is like Mr. Rogers was a black operative and did black ops in Vietnam. That story will not die. Armstrong has tried for years to say that it said for years. I'm sorry, I think he's dead now, right? He says, I have found many organizations claim me when I am not a member. He said, and there's a lot of families named Armstrong who claim that they're related. I've never heard of them. So he says, so many people want to identify with the success of Apollo, and the claim about me being a Muslim is just an extreme example of people inevitably wanting to be closer to. He was constantly throughout his life inundated by requests to appear at religious observances in Islamic countries around the world. He was so deluged with this stuff that he actually asked the U.S. State Department in 1983 to please just send a blanket rejection, would you, of all of this to our embassies in the Middle East and North Africa and Asia. And here's what the State Department put out. While stressing his strong desire not to offend anyone or show disrespect for any religion, Mr. Armstrong has advised the department that reports of his conversion to Islam are inaccurate. If the embassy receives queries on this matter, Armstrong requests that they politely but firmly inform the party that he has not converted to Islam and has no current plans or desire to travel overseas to participate in Islamic religious activities. So that helped tamp things down a bit, but the fact is the myth, the legend, has lived on through word of mouth, through the internet now, and there was another problem, that his initial denial that he was Islamic was postmarked Lebanon, Ohio, where he happened to live. And the fact that the letter came from Lebanon, even though it was Ohio, not Lebanon like Middle East, that added to the thread. So some people believe that Armstrong was so dedicated to Islam that he had actually relocated to Lebanon in the Middle East. So there it is. I had never heard that. So apparently the Armstrong is a Muslim convert because he heard the call to prayer on the moon. It's a great story. I love it. And this woman writing her piece, recalling this, first hearing it from this Somali, Abdullah, she says, I have always been enchanted by this legend, not because I believe it, but because it underscores Armstrong's mythic place in our collective imaginations, a sense of awe and wonder at the beauty and mystery of the universe, coupled with a belief in the power of science to help unlock these mysteries. It also serves as a testament to the attraction of Armstrong's actual exploits, and that his actual exploits hold for us mere earthbound, who can only look skyward and ponder the bravery necessary to soar into the unknown, as well as the sheer exhilaration they must have felt. And then she says this, which I think is just so true. Everyone loves a winner, and it is a universal trait to want to claim a winner as one of our own. You know, we do that all the time. It's a human thing. That's why, you know, if somebody's from Pittsburgh, even tangentially, well, you know, they're from Pittsburgh. Just the other day, I was talking about the Nobel, the physics Nobel winner, and I said, you know, she went to Alderdice. She worked at Yellow Cab. It puts us closer to them. I remember, and to this day, I'm still blown away by the fact that I met and sat and talked to a man who had been on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. And I mean, I was just blown away. The whole time we were talking, he was on my show when I was at WTAE radio, and spent an hour talking. And first of all, I just fell in love with him. I thought he was just an amazing smart, funny, very attractive man. And we just had so much fun, but I could never get out of my head. I mean, we'd go to a commercial break and I'd say, "You were on the moon! My God!" You don't go to the moon and not have it change your life. It gives, obviously, a perspective. It gives one a perspective that would be life-changing. To be able to look back at your home. And it's this big, the entire globe. It'd be a great perspective changer. All right. Well, partly I'm talking about dead people and today because the news is full of, the usual ridiculousness and gravity. But I'm only going to say this about the Kanye thing. It is Exhibit A, this story, of why Trump could well be reelected. And why this midterm election might not go as well as you think. This guy is a master of chaos and marketing. He's a carnival barker. P.T. Barnum would genuflect before him. So Donald Trump, a clown, has Kanye West, a clown, into the Oval Office. And it is, like so many things with this president, it's a train wreck. You can't take your eyes off it. And that's Trump's genius. So while so many other things were happening yesterday, our repulsive media, cable news and network news as well, like a dog. I mean, I can fake out my dog. You got a ball in your hand and you go like this and they go tearing and then you turn around and say, I never even threw it. They do it again. I never even. Trump throws shiny objects out there whenever he needs to with an absolute knowledge that the media will chase this bauble. The stories that media should have been giving a lot of attention to, of course, things don't get reported when you're chasing Trump's latest shiny object. And here's another reason I got really nervous about the midterm. And this is from, and I sometimes think these pieces are just intended to scare you so that you'll redouble your efforts, but I don't know. This is from David Leonhardt, the New York Times op-ed columnist. And this just landed today. I'll just read some of it to you. I mean, it took the stuffing out of me today. It's time for some alarm about the midterms. The most recent polls have underscored the real possibility that Republicans will keep control of both the Senate and the House. I had never... What? What? I don't think that's true. Nate Cohn, the New York Times elections analyst, says it's been a good 10 days for the GOP in a lot of important battleground states, and the polls are tightening up. And this thing says it is highly unlucky the Democrats will take the Senate, which of course was always going to be hard for them. But it says here, while Democrats are still favored to win the House, many of the races remain so close, with neither candidate yet polling above 50%, that, in fact, they could break either way in the next few weeks. And he says if Democratic voters fail to turn out, as historically is the case in midterms, well, and he says, I use the word alarm here for a reason. Because if this doesn't go well, or if we don't have that, even if we take the House, but it's not like a huge wave, then Trump will feel emboldened. The polls have tightened, they think, because of the Kavanaugh nomination and hearings. And it's pulled Democrats off their scripts. And he says this, and this is very upsetting. A second challenge for Democrats is their apparent inability to win big margins among Hispanics. Donald Trump is viewed in a relatively favorable light by 1 in 4 Hispanic voters. How is that possible? But that is not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is turnout. Hispanics, lower income Hispanics, young Hispanics, urban Hispanics just aren't motivated to vote. And that leaves you higher income, older suburban Hispanics who are not reliably Democratic voters. It's also unclear if the voters under 30 are going to show up. And he says the reason a lot of young people don't vote, and I've seen this in my son, is that they believe you shouldn't vote if you're not well informed. So my son has said to me about midterm kinds of elections, well, I don't know who any of these judges are. I don't know who are. And I've said, well, I'll get you some information. I said, I have gone into the polls lots of times not having a clue. And I assure you the majority of Americans do that. And at this point, you go in to save our democracy by voting anything but R. Okay? But there's a generational divide in that older people just think that you should vote because you should vote. And these younger people, bless their hearts, actually think they should be informed before they vote. Anyway, Leonhardt says, all of which is to say, don't confuse likelihood with certainty. The Republicans could win the 2018 midterms. I can't believe that. But I'm just worried about the Senate getting even worse with them picking up seats, which could well happen. Okay. There's going to be a heartbreaker on election night. There's going to be so many heartbreakers. Like, Beto O'Rourke losing by a percentage point. Claire McCaskill maybe losing by a percentage point. All these close races just slipping away by that much. Ay, ay, ay. We have a caller, I believe. Hello, caller.
How you doing, Lynn?
I'm fine.
Hey, I disagree with you completely. I saw polls last night that the Republicans are in big trouble, and it's because of the women vote. They are so far underwater with it. I mean, it's like 40 points. There was like 3 big ones they showed. And that Senate thing they keep saying, like I said before, and I'm repeating myself, that never was in play because the numbers aren't there. It's a numbers game, as they always say. They're going to win the House. How big of a margin, who knows? But we're going to pick up governorships, too. There's going to be some of that going on. My big worry is that the damn bastards are going to put the wrong person against Trump. That's why right now they need to recruit. They need to get Michelle Obama to run. She's probably the only one that can beat him because the rest of the jackasses don't know what she's smart. She knows how to. She can put him, give him a 1-2 punch and be elegant about it. She's going to be the one to beat him. The rest of fools, forget about him.
All right, well, let that go. She ain't going to do it, okay? Let that go. You got to find somebody else. Michelle ain't going to do it.
You're going to have Trump again. That's my big fear.
Well,
we're going to be in control of something, and he's going to be president.
Yeah, it's a legitimate fear. It's a legitimate fear. I assure you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because, I don't know who there's going to come out of the damn woods and do it. The people are showing me. I'm not even that guy you're talking about that could win by 1%. I'm not impressed by him either. I don't know.
Okay. Well, if Beto O'Rourke wins, he's a possibility. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye.
I do not think Elizabeth Warren is a winner. I know she's not. I mean, we got to be smart. I don't know. I don't think Democratic voters are very smart about who to run. And I might be one of the ones who doesn't know. I don't, whatever. While everybody was talking about Kanye West in the Oval Office yesterday, you were missing a big story, which has me so enraged at the Democrats that I'm afraid I'm not even going to be able to talk about it without starting to, be incoherent. So, the Senate closed up shop yesterday, and they all left to go home. But the Republicans, of course, who run the Senate, told Democrats that the only way they were going to close up shop and let them go home and try to keep their seats by doing some campaigning was if they signed off on 15, listen to this, 15 more Trump appeals court judges. 15. 1, 5. That's what happened. The Democrats said, okay. By last night, Mitch McConnell and his Senate Republicans, with their tiny little margin, confirmed 29 appeals court judges. The 15 were tacked on, are part of that. 29 appeals court judges nominated by Trump. And let me say this and take it in. Last night, the Democrats stood there with nothing and watched 29 more Brett Kavanaughs get on the federal bench. And that is so beyond what any president since the creation of the regional federal circuit court system, which brings us back to 1891, has ever been able to put on the bench. Trump, more than any other president of the United States, with this piddling Republican majority, which is really a minority in the nation because it's not representative of us, has added to the bench, in addition to the appeals court judges, 53 district court judges. And the reality is that these really right-wing conservative judges have made a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, on the Federal Appeals Court, on district courts for generations. And he's not even 2 years in. Barack Obama, it took him over, well, it took because the Republicans didn't let Obama, didn't just, I can't. Okay, once these judges that were confirmed last night are seated, 1 in every 6 appeals court judges in this nation will have been appointed by Donald Trump. And as I said, that no president has done anything like that. This is Mitch McConnell's doing. And the doggedness of right-wingers and their operation, unlike Democrats. So the New York Times reports Republicans exacted a steep price from Democrats for an arrangement that will free up the Democratic senators now to go and campaign prior to Election Day. The steep price, a historic imprint on the federal judiciary, pushing the nation's most important courts way, way to the right for the rest of my life and well into my son's life. Democrats agreed to swallow the 15 additional nominations to free up their more vulnerable members to campaign full-time for the next 3 weeks. Is there a caller there? I'm sorry. Caller, go ahead, please.
Hi, Lynn. This is Josie. Now that I am sick to my stomach, I just wanted to address something that you said a few minutes ago regarding you can't imagine that we won't take the House. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
I don't take anything for granted anymore. I can remember listening to you and listening to your show before the primaries, and so many of us were thinking about changing our party affiliation so we could vote for Trump so that no one else would get the nomination.
I remember that too.
I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do. Let's vote for
So
Trump so that they'll go down in flames, right? Oh my God.
So I don't take anything for granted anymore, and nothing.
Well, good
I
for
don't
you.
think back then in our wildest dreams we would ever think that we would be where we are today.
No.
And excuse me. Something that has me very, very concerned, and I don't really see too many other people being concerned about it, is I don't trust our election system. I don't trust
well, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
But nothing has been said about that. Nothing has been. It has not been shored up, even after it was determined that machines are vulnerable. Nothing has been shored up, and I am very, very concerned that that the election may be rigged. I don't know. Maybe I'm listening.
Well, it's rigged in a lot of different. It's rigged in a lot of little ways, but the security of our vote is definitely problematic, and
that's what I meant.
It's true. It is true. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I know I shared some of the stuff that was in a cover story in the New York Times Sunday magazine on this issue, and it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening.
So I shouldn't think as much as I do on it, because it really makes me feel very inconsequential, and it makes me. I just feel like we're up against something much larger than what we are all perceiving. That's all. That's all I had to say.
Well said. Really well said. Thank you. Thanks, Josie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And then, speaking of, it's rigged in various little ways, because that's what Republicans do. They suppress vote, and because they control so many state legislatures, they gerrymander, which skews the vote their way. Then they suppress voters that they feel would vote for. And how do they do that? Well, they're just geniuses. I mean, they're geniuses because they have no principles. If you have principles, you can't do what they do. I told you, I think, earlier in the week about how in North Dakota, after Hyde Camp won, the Republicans went to work. How'd she win? She won by 3,000 votes. Where were those votes? Oh, they were on Indian reservations. Okay, let's figure out a way to keep the Indians from voting. They did. You needed a voter ID that had a street address on it, and all of the thousands of Native Americans that live on tribal lands often do not have street addresses. They have P.O. boxes, which disenfranchises them. Now, that's before the courts. It was before the courts, but it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, didn't it? Am I right about that? Yeah, and the Supreme Court said, oh, that's okay. They did. Oh, that's okay. And now you have this thing going on in Georgia. I'm assuming many of you know about that. Georgia is one of those states where if there's a real blue wave, a black woman, Democrat, is going to be the governor of Georgia. The polls now are neck and neck. There. She, Stacey Abrams, is running against Georgia's Secretary of State, a guy named Kemp. Now, the Secretary of State is the person who oversees elections. This guy's now facing a lawsuit claiming that his office, Secretary of State's office, is putting the voting rights of tens of thousands of African American Georgian citizens in jeopardy. So he's being sued right now. There is, and under his, he pushed this bill last year, voting law bill, that is called the exact match law. Listen to this. This is what Republicans do. So Georgia has this thing called the exact match law. And that requires, and this is something out of the blue, totally new, this requires officials to stop any voter registration application if any information on it does not precisely match the voter's information and other records held by the state. Now, I got to tell you, in some of my legal documents, I'm Lynn Cullen. In other legal documents, I'm Ida Lynn Cullen, which gets shortened to Ida Cullen, Lynn Cullen. That would get me flagged in Georgia. But the exact match thing is something as small as a hyphen missing of a misspelled word. And anyone who gets caught up in this must then go through all these extra steps to verify who they are. This is what voter suppression looks like. And the Republican candidate is also overseeing this law in his role as Secretary of State. He's been asked to resign from that role while he's running. He has refused. So they are saying that there are right now 53,000 Georgia voters who right now are in this sort of political limbo because of the exact match law. And the overwhelming majority of those voters are African American. So here's another number for you. African Americans make up 32%. That's all. Just 1/3 of Georgia's population. The fact that a black woman in Georgia is running neck and neck with a white guy is amazing. Because only 32% of African Americans, 32% of the population is African American. Now let's look at the voters whose voter registration has been held up because of the exact match law. What percentage are African Americans? 70%. They make up 32% of the voters, but look at that. They make up 70% of the voters who are placed on hold, flagged for typos or errors. Under the law, they have 26 months to correct the information with local officials, otherwise the registration may be canceled. That law used to say that they had 40 days. That went to court and was struck down. So now they have 2 years plus. The NAACP is part of a lawsuit against it. And the president of the NAACP said this: it is a strain on our system of democracy when less than a month before an election, which could well produce the first African American female governor in the nation's history, we are seeing this type of voter suppression scheme attempted by a state official whose candidacy for the governorship produces an irredeemable conflict of interest. So I I don't know. Florida has also enacted such a law, and it went through the legal system with people saying it was an outrageous attempt to suppress votes, and it came out alive. Just like what they did in North Dakota, came out alive. Upheld by the Supreme Court. Upheld because the Supreme Court, this week, this happened with the North Dakota one. The case, that law had been declared unconstitutional by the first level of appeals courts it went to. Then it went to the next level of federal appeals courts, the very courts that are being packed now by right-wingers. And that right-wing court said, no, I think that law is just fine. I understand that it makes it more difficult for Native Americans to vote, but it's not a hurdle that, can't be gotten over. And so that decision was appealed to the Supreme Court, another court which has been packed by right-wing justices in the Trump administration. And the Supreme Court looked at the case this week from North Dakota and said, no, we're not going to hear it, which means that the lower court ruling stands. It's a way for the Supreme Court to say, let it go. Let it go. They can do that. No problem. We don't see that as a problem. But they don't have to technically have their blood on their hands. In all of these cases, it is so clear that these laws are an attempt to suppress minority votes. I don't know. So there you have it. The latest state polling in Georgia by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution showed the Republican camp leading Stacey Abrams by less than 2 percentage points. That's a dead heat. I don't know, guys. That's something, huh? So I think that's what I've got for you. I was also going to talk about how Republicans, how voters can vote for Republicans when health care apparently is a big issue for a lot of Americans. And Republicans, if you keep putting these guys in, you are not going to, insurance for pre-existing conditions is gone. We'll go right back to where we were. And that blows me away. And they're just lying about it. They say, oh, no, that's not true. It's true. I'll read this to you very quickly. Here's what you need to tell anybody who isn't sure how to vote. If you believe that Medicare is a bad thing and the government should not protect people with pre-existing conditions, vote Republican, because that's what they believe. If you want to defend Medicare and ensure coverage, even for those who have pre-existing health problems, vote Democrat. It's as simple as that. Republicans have hated Medicare since the idea first surfaced. Ronald Reagan said it would end freedom in America. Newt Gingrich shut down the federal government, trying to slash Medicare funding. You know they're after the Affordable Care Act, which has insured thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Americans who never were insured before. If you think Americans should not have access to health care. Vote Republican. You belong with those despicable people. Okay? That's my advice. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.